Hello, everyone. My name is Niyaz Mahdavi, and you are listening to the Young Minds Magnified podcast. If you have listened to the previous episodes of the podcast, you would know that usually I bring in a guest, a teenager, and they share their experience related to how a certain topic and situation affected them mentally. In this episode, rather than bringing in a guest, I will be sharing my experience. The topic I will be discussing is how COVID-19 affected me mentally. I will take a similar approach as I normally would in an interview with a guest. I will first read the question out loud, and then I will give my response to that question. The questions will be very similar to the ones I would normally ask. Before actually responding to the questions, I would like to share my research that I did beforehand to familiarize myself with different possibilities on how teenagers may be affected by COVID-19 mentally. I was able to understand the fact that COVID-19 was very difficult for a lot of teenagers, and this is not something that only occurred to me. It is still very challenging for some because this is still an ongoing process and we are all still going through this. Not only do teenagers have to go through many physical and mental changes as is, but they also have to go through the feeling of self-isolation and adapt to the situation. This is especially difficult for the sensitive minds of teenagers and can affect them very deeply. Therefore, COVID-19 did affect a lot of teenagers mentally. The moment I realized that this is genuinely an issue and that stress among teenagers really and truly increased during the pandemic is when I was able to, when I found out that a way teenagers started coping with the stress caused by COVID-19 was using drugs and alcohol. Now, this is of course not good, but in the case of teenagers, they think that this is the right path for dealing with stress, and this is of course completely false. It is necessary for teenagers and everyone in general to understand the fact that this is a challenge we are all going through at the moment. And it is necessary to understand that we are not alone and all of us are going through this and we can find different ways to cope with this issue. I truly hope that you will like this episode, and I hope that you find my experience somewhat valuable and you will find it interesting. Thank you in advance. Usually when I would start an interview with a teenager, I would ask them to introduce themselves first. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Niyaz Mahdavi. Currently I am 15, a student of the European School, and I am an MYP Year 5 student. Basically, I'm in grade 10. The first question is, have you ever been affected by COVID-19 mentally? The answer to this question is yes, I have been affected a lot during this pandemic, and this is mainly because of the fact that I experienced a lot of changes during COVID-19, and these were changes physically, mentally, and then there was the additional stress caused by COVID-19. Therefore, yes, I have experienced this, and I think it's not only me, and a lot of people experienced stress during COVID-19 as well. If I were to pick one reason why I was affected mentally and experienced stress because of COVID-19, what would the main reason be? I think that in general, I consider myself as an extroverted person. I do like to take time for myself and spend time for myself healing, to understand myself, to get to know myself better. Though I think the pandemic just gave me too much time and left me too self-isolated. I had so much time on my hands and spent so much time alone that I constantly fell into the hole of overthinking. I would think about situations that I normally wouldn't. An example I can give is that I started thinking about my weight a lot, my body, and I think that I couldn't accept the fact that I was going through a lot of changes, and COVID put this additional stress of me feeling alone and not being able to really talk to anyone about it. Therefore, I think the main reason for my stress during this time was self-isolation. The next question I have written here is there any specific moment or concrete memory that I remember where I was being affected by this issue a lot? I personally at the moment can't think of any specific moment at the top of my head. Though I can say that I remember the process and the feeling I felt during this time. I had a lot of difficulty coping and a lot of difficulty accepting. I just remember that there were these moments where I would just look in the mirror and I just didn't like what I would see. And the most difficult part, I could say, was that the only person I really had by my side who I could talk to was my mother. And my mother, she genuinely helped me a lot through this process, though I can say that I couldn't really talk to her properly either because she understood everything I wanted to say a little bit differently than what I wanted her to understand, if that makes sense. But yeah, in general, I just remember not being able to talk to anyone and just those moments that I just felt very, very alone. The next question is, what are some ways I used to cope with this issue, and are there any specific things I did to help myself? Well, I think the biggest way I was able to help myself was just calling my friends and I don't know, just going outside and doing these little things. I was able to adopt a lot of hobbies during COVID-19. I started skateboarding. I started cooking and baking especially. And I started just going on random walks. I really liked looking at the sunset, just watching the sunset. And one of the main things I would do to feel less lonely would talk to my friends. I would just give them a call. They were also free because we were all in quarantine. And so I would just talk to them, and it just kept me a little bit at ease because I would see them and they were going through the exact same pain as I was, and they were going through a similar situation, and it just kind of helped me realize that, oh, I'm genuinely not alone. Even though I was physically alone, I still had all these people that were with me at the same time. So I guess, yeah, calling others and just doing little things were a way I coped. If I were to give suggestions to others who are maybe even experiencing this now, I would probably say that just get to know yourself, though don't overthink. Please, just don't overthink. I made this mistake so much. It's very difficult, but it can be dealt with. I think a way I was able to deal with overthinking was I started writing, and I would write everything that would come to my mind. And eventually I would get so tired of writing that I would just not think about that topic anymore. So I guess that's a suggestion I would give. Also, I mentioned this before, but I would definitely recommend talking to your friends, anyone, it doesn't matter, just call someone. Even if it's your family member, even if you think don't they won't understand you, just talk about something random. It doesn't have to be necessarily about your problems, because in my case, as I mentioned, my mother wouldn't really understand exactly where I was coming from, and to the extent I wanted her to understand. So I guess the biggest recommendation I would give is just talk about things that can get your mind off of your pain, in a way, your stress, and can turn your attention to something else. Yeah, that would be the biggest suggestion I would give. That is all for my responses to the questions related to the topic of how COVID-19 affects teenagers mentally. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and I would like to thank you once more for listening to this episode. If you would like to listen to more episodes talking about similar topics, you may check out our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, both Young Minds Magnified. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.